Let's talk about cannabis consumption lounges in the state of Illinois. As it stands in Illinois, there are licenses to do cannabis cultivation, retail, transportation, and infusion. Notably, there are not licenses for consumption lounges, and I think that's just the way that it should be. This is actually one of the things in the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act that I like. I know, right? You don't often hear anything like that out of me, but it's one of the only parts that is not riddled with barriers to entry. Starting a cannabis consumption lounge in Illinois, as it stands now, is actually something that is achievable for most people. The same cannot be said about any other cannabis business in the state of Illinois. But don't take it from just me. Take it from owners of consumption lounges in Illinois. This is an instance where the lack of, let's say, strict regulation is actually working in our favor.
Yes, it actually is. That's the best part about this license, that it is municipality controlled. So there is some leverage in that.
I'm comfortable with what we're doing here. I'm not looking for any major changes.
Instead, there are tobacco retail licenses, which are easy to obtain and are not under the strict control of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, which legalized cannabis in Illinois. When combined with permitting from your local government or municipality, a tobacco retail license allows you to open a cannabis consumption lounge. Over the years, there have been bills to create licensing for cannabis consumption events. The longest standing group in Illinois cannabis events agrees that things are just fine the way that they are.
That's actually a good, I just thought of it. I was about to ask, do you have to deal with like licensing or whatever? And I remember in this last session, there was a proposal for like cannabis licensing events. Like, were you hoping something like that would happen, or do you not really care? What is that for you?
It's like since like 2021, like they've had something
coming back out.
and nothing happens, and the way I see it sometimes, like, I don't know, we're working the way we are, like,
The state of Illinois has proven themselves to be incapable of issuing cannabis licenses in a manner that is timely, fair, or truly equitable. I suggest that we keep this where it is, outside of the strict control of the CRTA. If it's the freedom to easily open a cannabis business or host a cannabis consumption event in the state of Illinois that you're looking for, then I suggest you keep your beloved lounges and events as far away from the CRTA as humanly possible. The fact that this is governed by local municipalities or local governments as opposed to our state's government seems like a blessing in disguise. It's only a matter of time before more of these pop up, and it's less of a question of complexity and more of a question of local politics and ingenuity. How you actually make money on a business model that is basically just a glorified hangout location. And maybe it's best that we continue to allow people to navigate their local politics and allow them the freedom to innovate rather than placing them on the rigid, sterile, and oftentimes seemingly inept oversight regime that we know as the CRTA. Sometimes I think it's better to let the locals decide what happens in their own backyards rather than to allow some large state body with no investment or involvement in your community to make that determination. Allow me to read the language from the law that allows all of this to take place. A dispensing organization or retail tobacco store authorized or permitted by a unit of local government to allow on-site consumption shall not be deemed a public place within the meaning of the Smoke-Free Illinois Act. In other words, you can smoke things inside of these establishments. If you look deeper into the law, you'll find that there's a requirement that you have about 80% of your revenue be tobacco products. And some people say that it doesn't make sense that these cannabis consumption lounges are required to have at least or around 80% of their revenue be tobacco products. And at face value, I agree with this notion. But The idea starts to make more sense when you realize the tobacco products that they are referring to are actually cannabis ancillary products like rolling papers, bongs, bowls, and more, which took me back to my days of going to a head shop before cannabis was legal, when all of the products were for tobacco use. Frankly, I think it makes sense that these establishments are able to sell cannabis ancillary products. I mean, don't you want to be able to buy a bong, some papers, or a bowl at your consumption lounge? This allows you to do just that. Ultimately, my friends, this comes down to taxes. The state of Illinois wants their taxes. How else can they get their taxes? Well, they must require that you sell something that is taxable by the state of Illinois. And what is something that's taxable by the state of Illinois? Well, tobacco products. So it's really simple when it comes down to it why this requirement exists. And I beg you, I plead you, to not make it more complicated than it needs to be. Maybe, in fact, things should stay just about the way that they are today. It's literally in the name of the act, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. We are going to regulate and tax cannabis. So in this instance, this is how they do that. We should be happy they're taking the hands-off approach they are taking with regard to regulation. We all know how much they like to regulate cannabis here in the state of Illinois, and we all know how good they are at doing just that. They've regulated the fuck out of this industry. If you'd like to view the full conversations that I had with all of the people that were featured in this video, you can go to our Patreon page now. Those conversations should be available for streaming by the time you're listening to this. That's chillinois.net/Patreon. chillillinois.net/Patreon. Thank you, everybody. Take care.